like to thank you for coming back to us. We're really looking forward to your wonderful presentation. And you know what? I could introduce you, but I really like the way you introduced yourself last time. Do it again. No, I really mean it, because I don't want to forget or to omit some parts of what makes it really very interesting, and why we'll have you again and again, I suppose. Go ahead.
Okay, let's see. I think maybe she's gotten on again. So I'll just go ahead. I'm Nancy Baker, and I'm a fellow UU from the long time member of the congregation in Milford, New Hampshire. And I spent years in education. I taught classical languages and philosophy, but also a fair amount of art history in seminars that I did. And after I retired, I became very much involved with the Currier Museum of Art in Manchester, New Hampshire, where I'm a docent, but I also do education activities there for them. And basically I give talks around the region in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So, and, I've been with you before doing, some programs. So generally, my style is pretty easygoing here. And today I'm going to talk to you about the Nativity in art. And it's something that has evolved over time, beginning in the 4th century. There were no nativity images before the 4th century. And then it began to evolve, and it's still evolving now. But when it began, Christianity was a really new religion. And it was having trouble because adherents were going to be either Jews who were embracing something new within Judaism, or it was going to be Christians who were largely Greeks spread all over the Eastern Mediterranean and the Levant. But then, of course, what happens is the church does catch on. It centers in Rome and in Constantinople. And then it vies back and forth in terms of its visual image, how they evolve, the Byzantine versus the Western. So that's what we're gonna do today. And I'm going to show you how it all unfolded in a way that honors the source material, but is not religious in tone. So let me share my screen here. So can you see it up?
Multiple images.
Yes.
Okay, let me see if I can.
You could probably click alternatively 1 through the end, from 1 to the end. Whatever's
Okay,
more.
how about that?
convenient.
You seeing a single image?
No.
No.
Are you running multiple displays?
Let me stop the share and start again.
Maybe you should click on slideshows. On top of your screen, it was saying slideshow, but it was crossed out.
Well, I've already on my.
Here,
Okay.
here it is.
showing
You
the
could
way I
see.
want.
There you go.
Okay, let me see if when I change the slide, you're seeing less than the whole range of my PowerPoint. Are you seeing a single slide there?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is where we'll start. And this is a sarcophagus in a basilica in Milan. And what you can see about it is that it's really simple. You have the swaddled baby Jesus in a trough-like thing, and usually it was either a trough of this kind or a wicker basket with an ox and an ass, and they're pretty consistent throughout nativities because they have a symbolic representation. So the ox represents the Jewish people, and they're weighted down by their own law, and the ass represents all the Gentiles, who are the other people joining Christianity. And they carried the sin of idolatry because they worship multiple images. So the idea is Christ arrives to free them both from their problems. And, you know, that's the essence of it. There's generally no Mary in these very early ones. Now, down below, your eye may have caught all those swastikas. And I just like to remind you that until the 1930s, the swastika was a very positive symbol throughout religions around the world, generally standing for things like hope and peace and prosperity and good health and that kind of thing. Here, it stands for a hooked cross, which again is a symbol that's foreshadowing the Passion Week and the crucifixion. The other thing you see there are two birds, and they're like the ox and the ass. They represent two different kinds of people who are embracing Christianity. So the one on the left is digging right into the grapes, right? He's eating with conviction. And so this would be the Jews, because they're used to embracing a single focus in their religion. And the one on the right is kind of tentative. And this again would be the Gentiles, who are a little bit doubtful. They've had a lot of choices in how they express spirituality, and they're wondering why they should pick this particular one. Now, as it moves on, and especially into Western Europe, you begin to notice little changes. Now, down below is the full panel that you're looking at in this illuminated manuscript from Saxony, and this is 11th century. Okay, so what you see here is Mary, and from now on, she's pretty much a fixture in any nativity, whether Joseph is there or not. If Joseph is there, he's either sleeping or he's got a pose like this one, where he's generally in the foreground and he's leaning his head on his hand. You see the baby in a type of trough, swaddled here. You see the ox and the ass. And then you also see a lot of angels. And the angels are hovered above a cave, in which, in the earliest representations, generally speaking, it's in a cave. Okay, so you see them there. And then in the top of the painting, you can see the angel who's coming down from heaven. And she's, or he, because they don't have gender, are telling the shepherds of the birth of the Christ child in a very horizontally red and green, or blue and green type of background. And the bed looks pretty luxurious. It's got feet and it's got a backrest. And Mary is in some kind of, it looks like sleeping bag. It's kind of a mattress type of thing. And you know they didn't bring that with them. This one is from about a century later. It's, again, a setting is in a cave, and you see Mary on the sort of mattress looking thing. She is cuddling the Christ child, who is very swaddled up. Joseph again is in the foreground, this time on the other side, leaning his head on his hand. All this is pretty typical. Up above, you can see the Magi, who are already on their way, with some angels helping them out, and they're pointing to the star in the sky, was showing them the way. And you notice that they're wearing funny white pillbox hats. In the early period, much of the influence is Byzantine, so very much more Eastern So the headgear is not the crowns like you're used to seeing with the Magi. You see the angel on the right announcing the birth to shepherds who are going to show up. And then you see something very unusual in the front. The Christ child is in the picture twice, once being held by Mary and once being bathed by midwives. Now, the thing here is, I know you're saying to yourself, midwives, and there is an apocryphal source for this called the Proto-Evangelicum of James. And in it is the story of the midwives. The Catholic Church put a poo-poo on that later on because they felt that it wasn't in the Bible. It was in the sources that they didn't include in the Bible. So it disappears from art gradually over the next couple of centuries. But here they are, and they're bathing the Christ child. Now, if you look at the Christ child, you're saying, boy, that doesn't look like a newborn baby to me in either location. And you have to be alert to this because there was this feeling in this particular time that Jesus was born, essentially, he had a baby body and that would grow, but all the rest of him, his face and his mind, everything was fully formed. In other words, adult. So he looks like a little old man in a lot of these. And this is called a homunculus. And you'll see it in the next several that we're doing. Finally, when you get to the Renaissance, we go back to the more human-centered approach. But don't be upset by that. And then you see the star, which is really God in heaven shining down with the rays, coming right down to the Christ child with the ox and the ass very nearby here. This is a Giotto, and Giotto is a very late Gothic, I guess you would say extremely early Renaissance painter from Florence. And you see things have changed a little bit here. You get the hint of the cave in the rocks, but you definitely have a little stable type thing with supports. Mary again is on the mattress, and she's reaching for the Christ child, who still looks a little bit too old here. And she's being handed the child by the midwife, who's on the extreme left. So it's not a whole bunch of bathing or anything like that. It's just very simple. You got the ox and the ass, Jesus asleep, the angel sending the message to the shepherds. Then you've got some animals. And there are two kinds of animals here. You've got the sheep, and they're all, light colored, and they seem to be looking out at you, welcoming you into the scene. And then you've got a goat who's dark, okay, and he has his back to it. And again, this is symbolic. So the sheep represent those who will be saved, okay? So, in other words, they're looking at you. So you, if you embrace this religious expression, and the goat represents those who won't. And that's why his back is turned away from the scene. This is an artist you may not have heard of, Bernardo Di. He was a student of Giotto's, and I've shown you two of his so that you can get kind of a feel for the way he does it. The one on the left is in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I don't believe it's on view at the moment. And the neat thing about this one is the way he makes the landscape be the backdrop and hold together an entire narrative. So in the top part, the angel is announcing to the shepherds, right? And then you've got these little floating, almost bumblebee-like cherubs hovering over the manger scene. You have Mary in traditional colored garb, wearing blue and red. Here she's wearing a red underdress and a blue mantle. In a few centuries that will be flipped. And the baby is swaddled, and the ox and the ass are looking on. Joseph is, doing his usual thing in the front. And then you see the same sheep representing the saved. and the dark goat representing the not going to be saved, except that now you've got this other single figure with the goat. And this one has another interpretation that's possible here. In more Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox traditions, when you see the single hooded figure in dark along with a black goat, this is what's called the shepherd tempter. In other words, he's showing up trying to tempt Joseph to repudiate Mary, saying that this isn't a virgin birth, you know, she was with somebody else, and trying to make him not be loyal to the family that he's adopted here. So religious symbolism is very complex. It evolves over time, and you have to do a lot of reading and studying about it to catch the changes in it. This is a Gerini. The color in this one is really quite nice. You see the Christ child again swaddled up and still with more advanced features than a newborn child. You have, you know, Joseph asleep with the head in the hand, and the shepherds have shown up. Okay, and the shepherds and Joseph are actually the best done things in the painting because of the play of light and dark in it, especially in Joseph's robe. This was quite advanced painting technique for the 14th century. And here you can see the ox in it, but the ass is a little bit more obscured.
Nancy, I had a question. I note that the Christ child is wrapped in blue and white stripes in the last couple of images. Is there significance of that?
It's now the 14th century, so we're bringing color in more and more.
But the striping, the fact that the child is in the same, I was wondering if there was a significance
Right.
of the continuation of that.
Right. So in other words, the swaddling cloths were probably all basically one color, you know, something easily washable. But if you want to add color in, you take these thin bands that they're wrapped in, and you alternate the color of the bands so that you get an opportunity to get more color. And if you're going to have color here, it's almost always blue and white, because blue is a color of heaven. Now, this is one of my favorite nativities, mostly I think because it's so much more human. We're getting closer and closer to the High Renaissance now, where humanity and the human reaction is going to be more important than religious doctrine in getting people to engage with us. So you see how close Mary and the child are. You can imagine that that's an ordinary relationship. Does the baby still look a little bit too old? Yes. And Joseph here is very active. He's preparing something for them to eat, getting the fire going and so forth. So he has a more active role in the whole thing. And the meal preparation here is a breaking of the fast, because remember, in Advent, you're waiting and waiting for the Christ child to appear. And that's what Advent is all about. And once he has appeared, then you can break this fast. And so Joseph is working on that. He's just beautifully done here. Very touching. The ox and the ass are just fascinating here. Their expressions. It's kind of like, who invited them, you know, or one wants to be closer than the other. But it adds some human interest, but in the form of an animal here. Notice that the thatching on the little stable has a hole in it. And from now on, the stable is going to look a little dilapidated with holes in the roof through which light can shine, because obviously the light shining is what Christ brings into the dark world during his birth, okay, as a result of his birth. This is the Lindbergh Brothers, who did the famous Treasure de Duc de Berry. And so this is one panel from it. And I picked this one because it's got a couple of things in it that are quite different. So you notice here that the Virgin is kneeling almost, and she's, and you can see her bent knee in the folds of her dress. And she's adoring the Christ child. She's not cuddling here. So this is a new thing that happens as a result of the vision of Saint Bridget of Sweden, who had this vision, and that's what she saw, and she got good press about it, so it spread everywhere, and you're going to see it for a period of a couple of centuries constantly. So the Christ child is on the ground, or sometimes there's a little straw like there is here, and he's being surrounded by little hovering, circling blue cherubim, okay? And I don't know what you know about the 9 choirs of angels, but the top 2 are seraphim, and they're on the top of the picture surrounding God the Father in the top of the picture, and cherubim, who are number 2, okay? And I'll talk about what they are in just a sec. Then you've got Joseph, and he's a little different because he's awake here, and his hand is up in a blessing. And notice the hat he's wearing and the very, very long Eastern type beard. So he's giving him an Oriental kind of cast here. Then you see the angel, of the Lord announcing to the shepherds, who will be by any minute. The ox and the ass have their back to the Christ child, which is a little unusual. And then you see the shepherds. This is a little mini adoration of the shepherds. And then up above the stable with the thatched roof that's, dilapidated, you see 3 angels singing. And of course, they're a choir of angels too. But let's talk about the seraphim who are around God the Father, who is sending the ray down. And he's holding a globe, which is what Christ is going to save the world, right? And surrounding him are these red angels, and they're the seraphim, and they're red because they're burning with a love of God. They are the closest to God, and basically all they do is sing his praises constantly. That's their job. They have 6 wings, so you can't really see all of them here. Then you have the cherubim, who get out in the world a little bit more than the seraphim do. They're in the first rank of the 9 choirs of angels. They're number 2, but they don't engage with humans very much. They just do the bidding of the God, but more to spread his wisdom in the world than anything. And so what you get here with the dove in it is the Trinity, of course, the Christ child, the Holy Spirit, God in heaven. This is Robert Campan, and this is one of the most famous of all of the nativities, and it's a little unusual. He is a Netherlandish painter, which means he painted in Flanders. And you see a lot of activity going on in this painting, and it's an adoration of the shepherds. It's got the midwives, and then it's got a regular nativity in it. So the child and his parents are shown in the threshold of this pretty dilapidated manger or stable, and the ox and the ass again have their back to them. Mary is in white, okay, which symbolizes her purity. And that's important because both with Joseph and the midwives, there's going to be some doubt in this apocryphal source. This comes from the apocryphal source about her purity and virginity. So there she is. You see the Christ child, who does look a little bit older, and he sure doesn't look well cared for here, but he's glowing. So this is the St. Bridget vision. Then you see different groups of angels coming, and they're holding what are called banderoles or speech scrolls. that, tell you stuff in Latin. And the most important stuff, it's usually glory to God in the highest or something like that. But here it's a little bit more interesting because you've got two midwives here. And in the apocryphal source, Joseph got a little nervous and he sent for a midwife who showed up. Okay, so these two midwives are there. So that's why they're all in the earlier paintings. And the one midwife, Salome, doubts the virgin birth. She basically is saying, this doesn't look like anything I don't see all the time, and what happens is that when she touches Mary, her hand withers. And one of the scrolls says, touch the child and you will be healed. And she does, and her hand is restored. And of course, she immediately becomes an incredibly loyal follower of this whole scene. What you see in the background is the Netherlands. This isn't Palestine. People who wanted to look at this painting wanted to look like something that they knew. And it's ordinary activity that's going on there. People heading to a market day, that kind of thing. It's a very nice use of early aerial perspective in this particular painting. The only thing that makes it, you think that it's this time of year is that the trees have fewer leaves on them. Right? Now, this one is interesting for a number of reasons. The painter is not much known, and the St. Thomas altarpiece is his most famous surviving work. It has 4 panels in it. The Nativity is one of the 4, probably the most famous. And in all the panels, the background is not blue or black, but red. So you see that here, which is, it does, and then when you take the angels who have red wings, right? This is like the burning with the love of God, right? Now, the interesting thing here is that the stars are all identical and they're all perfectly evenly spaced. Okay? So it's a very well put together painting. You see the angel, announcing to the shepherds in the upper right, the ox and the ass, having lunch while the whole thing is going on. And then it's a St. Bridget vision that, Mary is adoring, that notice that Mary is a blonde like you'd find in Germany, not dark-haired. The baby actually looks a bit more like a baby here and is glowing. And then God in heaven is shining the light down on him. This is the Fabriano Nativity, which is the predella. And a predella is a lower inset in a major painting or altarpiece. And so you can see it when I've shown you the whole altarpiece that's in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, you can see it's on the left. So the predella is the whole bit underneath. It's got 3 scenes, and the one on the very left is the one you see above. The thing about this one that is so wonderful is the light. Fabriano has a wonderful way of adding light to the painting in a way that's very rich and very warm. There's nothing unusual about it. It's a typical St. Bridget one with the Christ child, glowing away and Mary adoring. The ox and the ass, very close by, quite interested in what's going on. And you still have a cave, but you have this other building on the side. And the 2 women on the left are, one is curious, one is not. These may or may not be midwives, who knows. You see the stars in the heaven, but see, it's a blue background, not a red background. And then you see the angel of the Lord announcing to the shepherds. Quite a lovely painting. This is one of my favorites. Now, this one is a Lippi, and I picked this one to show you because it's different on purpose for a number of reasons. For one thing, despite what you think about the figure in sort of the upper left of the painting, that is not Joseph. Okay, so no Joseph in this painting. Mary is adoring. She's wearing the blue and the red like she will. And she's got a platter halo. which is typical of this period, not one that circles her head like the one on the Christ child, but kind of hovers like a platter up over the top. The Christ child is a baby, within the range of what we would call baby, okay? Adorable looking with blonde curls, okay? And if you look very carefully, let me see if I can get if you look right in here, what looks to be Jesus' left foot is actually, you see that there's a goldfinch there, right there. And this, you often have symbolism in religious paintings that foreshadows something else, particularly the Passion Week, the crucifixion, whatever. And the goldfinch does that. So more and more, these nativities are going to be embedded with foreshadowing type symbolism. So Mary is kneeling and the Christ child is lying on these posies that are very beautiful. And this is what's called a hortus, a garden, conclusus, enclosed garden. And it shows up in all kinds of Madonnas that you see and in nativities. And what it means is wherever the Virgin Mary is, this enclosed garden in which she is protected, protects her purity, her virginity, and lets her do her job essentially as Queen of Heaven. Okay? She's rather untouched. She lives in this enclosed garden, which has all these flowers in it, much of which are symbolic. And then on the left, you see John the Baptist, who is Jesus' cousin. He's got a platter halo too. And he's got his usual spear and his, banderole that says, "Behold the Lamb of God," which Jesus is. And he's wearing his camel skin coat, which he does. But the difference here is that John the Baptist and Jesus, according to the Bible, were very close in age. Their mothers gave birth within a few months of one another, John just being a few months older. Where here, he's clearly half a dozen years at least older. Okay, so that's non-biblical. The guy in the upper left is essentially part of the patronage of this. So if you paid for the picture, you got to be in it, is the way it works in Renaissance art. And so this is Saint Romuald, and he was part of an order of monks who were very into the forest, okay? And they were also very much supported by the Medici, okay? So this is, in a sense, a Medici-sponsored painting. So that's why it's in a forest background, because of Saint Romuald and the Medici influence on this painting. And then you see God the Father up above and the dove of the Holy Spirit linked by the beam of light, which is Christ, of course, he's the light of the world. So you have the Trinity in this picture as well. This one, not a lot is known about the painter. It's really very simple. And the reason I picked it to show was that clearly, even though you have a homunculus here, the older looking baby, the baby is on the cloak of the mother, so not on the bare ground, and is not glowing himself. Instead, three angels have showed up, and they're gold, and they're providing the glow and the shine here, which I think is kind of interesting. It's another way of handling that problem. This one is the most unusual of all nativities ever painted. And so I'm going to take a little bit of time on this one, because it's intriguing beyond belief. And there's a lot in it, all of which has a good deal of meaning. So what you've got is a conflated nativity with adoration of the Magi and adoration of the shepherds. So let's start in the center of the picture and look there. So you have the Christ child. He's on a cloth and he's nude, but he's reaching up his hands and legs playfully toward his mother, who is adoring in her customary red and blue. The ox and the ass are very interesting. Joseph is half asleep just to the left of him. Then behind Joseph, there seem to be these three angels, or an angel, and she's wearing this kind of rose color, and she's pointing to the Christ child, and the three guys with her are the Magi, but they don't have any gifts. No gifts, no gold, frankincense, or myrrh, which is really unusual. On the right, another one of the angels who's in white is, has her hand on the shoulder of one of the shepherds and is pointing out the scene. Now, if you notice those two angels, they're not so much different than all the other angels you're seeing. And these angels are basically color coded for you. And the color coding is for faith, hope, and charity, okay, which are, cornerstones of the Christian message. So they're repeated all over. In the top of the painting, you see the sky, a golden dome of heaven opening. And here are these angels, and they're dancing around, and every one of them is holding an olive branch for peace. Then you see three of them, the faith, hope, and charity idea. They're holding the olive branches too, and they're sitting on the roof of the stable, which is in front of a cave. Right? So everything is in this. Then in the front of the painting, we've got another three of the angels, and they seem to be grasping these three fellows, and the three fellows are coming up from under the earth. So let me show you. Whoops, sorry, I need to go back one. If you look at this part of the painting, the earth has opened. These fellows are coming up out of the earth, and they're being gathered in by these angels because they're being saved. They've been in hell, essentially. And what you also see are some devils. And unfortunately, they got out and they're scurrying to try to get back into hell, right? So if you're wondering why that would be in a painting of the Nativity, this is a political painting. So Botticelli lived and was a popular painter in the time of Savonarola. And Savonarola was a religious reformer within the Catholic Church who felt that the church was very corrupt and was taking rather extremely radical, violent ways of trying to force change. Okay. One of which was the famous bonfire of the vanities, in which people's, opulent possessions were being thrown into a bonfire so that we could go back to the purity and the simplicity. Now, in the end, and this is in a time when the Medici are done and Florence is in political turmoil, so he fills the void, but the world is not ready for that kind of void yet. And he meets a nasty end. Botticelli is, what he's doing here is pointing out that while the church needs reform, maybe Savonarola's way of doing it is a bit too much too soon. And if that were known to Savonarola, Botticelli probably would have met an early nasty end. But this painting, very unusually for this period, is on canvas. Ordinarily, if this were going to be an altarpiece, it would be on a wooden panel. And a wooden panel burns very nicely in a flame, but a canvas can be rolled up and hidden, which this one was. And it's in the National Gallery in London. And if you're there, this is well worth a long look. This is another extremely famous altarpiece. It's in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. And sometimes it makes me upset that people go in the room that it's in, and all they do is look at what's on the opposite wall, which is Botticelli's Birth of Venus. But the Portinari altarpiece was commissioned by Tommaso Portinari, who was a banker who worked for the Medici, and he was living in Bruges in Flanders. And it's because he's the patron and commissioned it, he gets to be in it. So it has three panels. and these are the left and the right panels that show him and his family. So you can see him kneeling closest to the right edge, and his two sons. The littlest one was born and added in just at the very end of the painting. The painting was actually finished when he was born. And behind Tommaso is St. Thomas, and he's holding his spear by which he was martyred. And the reason he's there is that, of course, it's Tommaso Portinari. His saint's name is from St. Thomas. And the elder boy with the red sleeve is Antonio Portinari. And so Antonio's namesake is St. Anthony Abbot, whose symbol is a bell, and you can see it there. Now, what you see in the background are Joseph and Mary on their way to Bethlehem. You can see Mary on the donkey. On the right side of the painting, that panel, is Mrs. Portinari, and she's the older figure in black, and her daughter Margherita in the green, and they are each with their saint names. So the one above the little girl is Mary Magdalene, and you can tell it's Mary Magdalene because she's carrying a little pot of ointment, okay, by which she healed Christ's wounds. And then you can see Saint Margaret here, and here, let me show you this one. She was martyred essentially with a dragon. The dragon tried to kill her, but she used the cross, and you can to ward off the dragon. That you can see the dragon right here. It's kind of interesting. And then what you see in the background is a shepherd or someone asking a man for directions to the cave where the Holy Family are. Now, this is the center panel of it, and it's just utterly loaded with symbolism. So, but you see the Mary, and she's in dark blue here, which is a little unusual for this time period. And she's kneeling with her hands in an attitude of adoration. The Christ child is on the ground, again, still looking a little bit older and glowing. And then you see St. Joseph on the left with his hands in an attitude of prayer. And he has cast off one shoe as a gesture of respect to the Christ child. And then you see the angel in the very upper right is announcing the birth to the shepherds who are already on their way in adoration. And again, let me see. Right here, you see two women, and they're gossiping over a fence. And what this is, it's a representative of the scene, the people who are not there, in other words, they didn't see it, that would be us, and the unseeing, those who witness it, but it doesn't mean much to them. Okay, so they're in the painting as well. And then there are 15 angels. It's a little unusual for them to be all dressed as though they were in garb of Catholic priests, but they are. And you can see that some of them have multicolored wings and some of them have white wings. Okay? And the two in the blue toward the back, notice that their hands are up in a gesture of adoration or prayer, which is, they're looking at us. So basically that's what we should be doing. And a lot of the symbolism is in the front of the painting here. So the sheaf of wheat represents the bread of the Eucharist, and the grapes vines on the left of these are the wine of the Eucharist. You can see that right down here, the vase on the left. And then the orange lilies are passion, and the columbine is the Holy Spirit. And you can see, all of this kind of symbolism just loaded in this painting, especially like you see the irises here, the blue and the white, they represent purity and virginity. And it's one of the reasons she's wearing this colored dress. This is Michael Pager's Nativity, and it's beginning to be a little bit more human here. Humanism is coming in. I personally think the best things in this picture are the ox and the ass, particularly the ass's intent expression here. And you see again the nude but glowing Christ child, but on the robe rather than on the ground. Mary with the platter halo. It's beautifully done in terms of the way the light comes into the painting. Lovely horizontals and verticals here too. This is Caravaggio, and this is one of the sad stories of art history. This painting was stolen in 1969 from the Church of San Lorenzo in Palermo by the Sicilian mafia, and it's never been recovered. And about 5 or 6 years ago, they installed a copy of it in the same church. But fortunately, images of it were there before it was stolen, so I was easily able to get one off the internet. So you see that this is a little unusual. This is a Baroque painting. The Christ child is on a combination of straw and cloth on the bottom of the painting, but Mary is seated on some type of low seat here, and she's a little bit more maternal than she is adoring. And then you see the angel, and the angel has one arm up, indicating that God in heaven is approving and making all of this possible. And then it's got the usual Gloria and Excelsis Deo banderole. I think here the ox is just beautiful, wonderfully done. I mean, Caravaggio is a fabulous painter. The Saint Joseph is wearing a floppy big hat and carrying a cane, which is the way he's going to be kind of from now on in the painting. He's not the sleepy old man. I mean, he's still an old man, but he's not so sleepy. And then you get two saints, St. Francis and St. Lawrence. And St. Lawrence, on the left, you can hardly see his face here because the way it blends into the background. This is chiaroscuro. And then St. Francis on the right. And if you're wondering who the figure is in the front with its the back of its head to you, that's essentially you. It's a patron who is taking your place in this painting. If you paid for it, you got to be in it. And it's all of the church looking on after the fact. This one is a fairly modern one. This is a Googan. And you're probably jumping to the conclusion that it's Mary sitting in the front on the purple chair with the baby. No. Mary is on a bed in the background with almost a halo over her. She's exhausted. The baby is in the front, being held by a nurse or midwife with an angel overlooking them. Okay, so this is one of the first nativities in which mother and child are separated by a distance, but it's very modern. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes to look at a very few paintings of the Adoration of the Magi and go back and do it chronologically. So what you're seeing here is a panel from a Roman sarcophagus. And so you have Mary, and again, a homunculus, right? See how old the Christ child looks. They're each bringing gifts, and they're pretty much the same, although slightly different, like big round loaves of bread and bowls. And the first one is pointing to a star. They generally look pretty much the same age, same look. Even the camels look the same. Then in the Byzantine influence, which is all over the famous mosaics that are in Ravenna, what you're seeing is age discrimination. In other words, you've got an old man, a middle-aged man, and a younger man. And they're wearing Phrygian caps, which are, and excuse me for saying it, but sort of like Smurfs, you know, the cartoon figures that had the floppy tops on the hats. they were white, but these are red. They're called Phrygian caps. And they're wearing Persian pants too. Okay? And in all of these, they sort of stride forward and each carrying their offering of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, toward the Christ child. And the Christ child isn't in this one, they're just on their way. This one is the main panel. When I showed you the predella from this that's in the Uffizi Gallery, this is the main panel, which is an adoration of the Magi. And this painting, you could look at it all day. There's so much in it. Okay, so you see Mary holding the baby Jesus again, who's still a little bit older, but a child at least. And the three Magi showing up. They are age different, but not necessarily regional differences yet. But notice how sumptuous their clothing is. Just incredible. And this was a chance for Fabriano to show off his wonderful skill in painting detail. Plus, this one was commissioned by an extremely wealthy patron who could afford for Fabriano to use the very best paints. So they're wearing crowns, and Caspar, the oldest one, has put down his crown and he's already offered his gift. And the gift, which is of course gold, is being held. You see the two midwife types on the very left? They're very curiously, and personally, I think rather rudely inspecting it, right? Oh, wonder how much this is worth, kind of thing. The Joseph is very attentive. The ox and the ass are beautifully done in the painting. And then you see the other two, but then you see a little boy in blue toward the front of the painting. And he obviously is hoping that maybe Caspar dropped one of the gold coins and he's searching for it. And you see a dog on the very left, and he's not looking because he's a little nervous that the horse is going to step on him. All right. Now, in this painting, the person who paid for it is right here. This guy in a turban, and he's holding a falcon. And that's the symbol of his family. If you look down here, you can see the little fella looking for anything that's dropped. So very rich, very sumptuous painting. The whole altarpiece is in gold leaf. Well worth a look if you're in the Uffizi Gallery. This is a Gossard, and this one is loaded with detail as well. And it's changing things just a teensy bit here. He's crammed it with just about everything. And some of it's what you would expect, and some of it is not. So the three wise men are not lined up. They're spread across the picture. But now they are elderly, middle-aged, and young, but the youngest one is generally black, meaning that he's a Moor or black. So you can see they put down he's put down his fancy hat, and he's offered the goblet of the golden coins. This is Caspar, he always goes first. And the baby, who looks kind of baby-like here, is actually taken one of them. And then you have Balthazar, the Moor, on the left, and Melchior, the middle-aged one, on the right, holding a giant thing of frankincense. But the interesting thing about this painting is it isn't just the stable that's dilapidated, the whole front of the painting is. And it's got dogs chewing bones and all of that in it. Joseph is peeking out holding a staff from the left part of the building. The ox and the ass are peeking out further down. You can see the ass. And then the upper part of the painting is all these hovering angels. And so the painting is divided into divine and human. And what's holding it together are all the verticals in the painting. And it's very colorful. This one is, again, fairly modern. It's PreRaphaelite watercolor painting. believe it or not. And it's enormous. It's 101 inches tall and 152 inches wide. It's the largest watercolor that was ever painted at this particular time. And you see an angel, she or it is hovering, holding the star, right? It's very detailed. And then you have the Christ child, who's clearly a baby, being held by the Virgin Mary, and Joseph holding some firewood. Notice she's sitting in a hortus conclusus, right? She's surrounded by the flowers. She and the child are sitting on the flowers, on straw that's in these flowers. And the Magi have crowns, and they've come with their gifts. The thing that's amazing about this is the richness of the color, the depth of the color in this painting. And there's no ox or ass. And this is the last one. This is very modern. This is a contemporary painter. He's British, although he's for the last several years has been living in Connecticut. And it's a little unusual, and it's a conflation of the way that a medieval stained glass would be used in the same way as a modern painting. In fact, there's an art critic who says that looking at paintings of his, like this one, is like looking at a stained glass window through the eyes of Bart Simpson. Okay, it's whimsical, and it's both sacred and it's mundane, and it's both cosmic and it's comic. And really, this is what appeals to modern young audiences. And so this is what I mean when I'm saying that the Nativity evolves with the people who will buy these paintings, right? So very interesting. So that's it. There you go.
Oh, thank you very much. It was very interesting. Thank you very much.
Is there any symbolism in the halo? The halos in the pictures?
You begin to see halos in illuminated manuscripts. So they're kind of a medieval addition to it. And halos evolve just like any other thing in painting. And so they start out as surrounding the entire head, right down under the chin. The ones of Jesus have a red cross in them. You can see those parts. And originally just Mary and Jesus would get them. And then as time went on, Joseph got to have one too. And then after that, if you were a saint of the Catholic Church, you got to have one, right? So, and then they evolved. And because, to be honest, let's face it, if you're painting a whole bunch of people and they all have these great big halos like this around their heads, how are you going to see the person behind them, right? So it was a problem of order and organization in a painting. And the more you get toward the Renaissance, the more they try to find ways to have a halo, but not have it get in the way of seeing the rest of the picture. So what happens is that you get the platter halo, like I showed you, which it kind of hovers like a spaceship up over the head. Or you get one where it's a platter halo, but it's transparent. You just get to see the edge of it, right? And you can see right through the rest of it. And then pretty much it goes back the other way. Only Mary and Jesus get one. And then finally, they don't even get one. So, you know, the whole halo thing evolves over time. The more it's about human beings from the Renaissance on.
Originally, the meaning of the halo was supposed to be the auras.
Yeah, yeah. They
Aura.
started out as mandolas, which were whole body halos, and then went just to the head. Yeah. I mean, one could do a whole program on nothing but the symbolism of angels and halos. In fact, I have. So, other questions?
There's a question in the chat, which
Oh, sorry, didn't look.
Nancy And Mark Davis asked, would you tell us how the earliest artists were informed about the details of the birth, teachings, assuming scriptures weren't available to them? This is their question.
Well, of course, scriptures were available. Okay, the Bible was translated from, the Aramaic into Greek, and then from Greek into Latin fairly early on. But the problem was literacy. It wasn't that the scripture wasn't available, it's that people couldn't read them. So art was used deliberately to pare down the message, and to pare it down, frankly, in ways that were directing what people were thinking. And so it's the Catholic Church that do it, because the largest patrons of religious art, of course, was the Catholic Church. And so what was shown was what they would pay for, or let a patron pay for. And having something that was not the same as the straight up message didn't happen until the Reformation. And then you get the Counter-Reformation. So, you get famous painters emphasizing the humanist look at a nativity. But then I didn't happen to show one by Rubens, but Peter Paul Rubens is a Counter-Reformation painter, a Catholic, right? Who's showing it the old way. So, people, and by then though, people were beginning to read. The printing press came in the mid-15th century. So more and more people are able to read for themselves. But what are they able to read? Translations that were provided by, paid for by the church. Even the King James Bible of the church, while it was paid for by King James, it was sanctioned by the English church, right? So, and so the only way to do this is to be able to read. I don't read Aramaic, but I do read Greek and Latin. So one can read for oneself, and one sometimes goes, oh dear, this is what it really says, but this is not what's in this version of it.
Nancy, I had a question that people obviously seeing these paintings are, in cities and going to and seeing these displays, but how about, the common people? Was there community art, or, art obviously that hasn't survived, but are there people doing art in their villages and communities that are replicating this, or also telling the story or duplicating these messages?
Not so much, unless they are fairly well off. So let's say that you live in the countryside, but you own the manor, right? And you have the money to hire an artist to do a private altarpiece for you. And some of the world's great art was done for people's private chapels. So when I showed you the Portinari altarpiece, yes, it's in the Uffizi Gallery now, but it was in the Portinari's private chapel in Florence, until the Medici were no more and Portinari was no more. So a lot, and the St. Thomas altarpiece was actually done for a church that was a very minor church. Now, the problem with that then is that when you have religious wars, which happen, even in, the 17th and 18th centuries, things get destroyed. World War II also, these things get destroyed or confiscated and lost. So it's a never-ending battle. Even in modern times, somebody goes into the church in Palermo and takes a famous religious painting. It's a Caravaggio, right? Now, the problem with that one is sort of like it was with the Isabella Gardner. Okay, so you stole a Rembrandt. Okay, unfortunately, the Sea of Galilee is known to everybody. So how are you going to sell it? The only way you can sell it is if you had a private commission to steal it, and it's sitting in somebody's private home. But that didn't happen so much in the Middle Ages. And sometimes these images are on parchment or on vellum. If it's on vellum, we're a little luckier because vellum will last a little longer if it's properly prepared. Wooden panels, which is what much religious art, unless it was a fresco and it was right on the wall, and then heaven help it, right, like the Last Supper, then it means that the wooden panel had to have been very properly seasoned and prepared to accept the paint, right, with the right kind of paint that will not only last but not deteriorate in color. And so many of them were toxic, of course. Canvas, believe it or not, if it's properly prepared and properly stored, has a slightly better life than wooden panels, which will warp. So a lot of it has to do with money and materials, as much as anything. Other questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm here. Sorry to miss the beginning. I apologize. Was a wonderful presentation, and you've done 2 others that were wonderful. So it was great. I have one question. I know you explained it, but I didn't get all of it. But why is Jesus depicted as older in a lot of the paintings?
Okay, well, in the very early depictions of him, beginning in the 4th century, basically right up until almost the Renaissance, but gradually decreasing over that time period, was the idea of that Jesus did not evolve as human beings did because he wasn't a human being. Okay, he was divine, but in a human appearance. So his appearance can be baby-like, but his mind and his spirit are divine. Therefore, they're perfect from the beginning. He doesn't get more divine next, in other words, he wasn't born and next month he'll be a little more divine and a little more divine after that, as he grows like babies are, like babies do. But in fact, he was perfect.
In addition to that, there is the fact that for a long time, young children were not really well painted. It was very difficult for
Yes.
painters.
Yep.
And you have that not just in religious paintings, but in all paintings. So the homunculus, the notion is not just for Jesus. It happened to all babies, the children.
They look like little shrunken adults.
Exactly.
Paintings.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that happens right up through the 19th century, until portrait painters began to paint children for their parents. In other words, if you look at John Singer Sargent, he did paintings of children, so that their parents would essentially have pictures of them, and they look like kids, right? But before that, they were addressed in a more adult way, and they look like kind of chopped off adults. But the idea of the homunculus is a doctrinal one as well, because the idea was that you don't get more perfect over time. You either are perfect from the beginning, perfectly wise, perfectly compassionate, perfectly, all those things that you think of for Christ. You don't have more of it as you age. You've already got it. So the way to express that was to put the adult man's face on the baby, which upsets us because it looks very odd.
Thank you very much. It was very informative, and really it showed us an evolution that maybe we might not have thought of. And it's really interesting. Thank you very, very much.
You are very welcome. So when you go to an art museum, don't be afraid to look at the religious paintings. No.
Thank you.
I'm not religious, and I love religious paintings.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Any
very
other
welcome.